All right, now we're getting ready for Chapter 6, looking at the social, mobile, and auction. So agenda for today, another quick review, and then we'll jump into Chapter 6, where the three main topics are social media. In particular, we're going to focus on Web 2.0. And why did my screen suddenly flip? I don't know if you guys see that. I got to figure out what's going on there. You know, that's the funky thing about computers. Sometimes they do things without you expecting it. And it sucks. All right. Where was I? So focus on Web 2.0. Because it's a slightly broader concept, and I think it really helps drive home why social media is so freaking phenomenally successful, and why you should be interested in really studying it in more depth and understanding the interconnections between it. And then we're going to talk briefly about mobile commerce and online auctions. I would say 90% of today is going to be looking at the social network and Web 2.0. Now, my take on Web 2.0 is going to be quite a bit different than what the book does. And so I do encourage you to read the book, Chapter 6 in that section. My coverage is, like I said, significantly different, but I think it brings a good perspective to help you see the big picture. And briefly again, mobile commerce and online auctions. And here's the thing, with all these topics, I could spend weeks talking about each one of these. And the fact that I have to boil down all three of these into one class is really quite a shame. But we'll at least get you started, give you the base framework from which we can go forward. And so let's start with the review. So we've talked about in chapters 1 and 2 what is the internet and the kind of the technological infrastructure, the architecture of the internet. And it is a network of networks, which is composed of things like email, World Wide Web. It's run using TCP/IP as your backbone. We talked about the domain name system and how your computer can get to a website that you request. Right. We also talked about how to make money on the internet, and now it's Chapter 3, looking at revenue models and then establishing yourself as a web presence, because how significant that is to actually building trust online. Chapter 4 got into marketing on the web, and we dug into a lot of that in depth, looking at search engine optimization and branding and all kinds of other good things in there. Chapter 5 got into B2B, so business-to-business commerce, and a lot of the technologies behind it. And we talked about services and particularly cloud computing and service-oriented architecture. And then we also got into things like EDI, extranets, and so on. But the idea is that there's a lot of connectivity between businesses that's going on. And that's important, especially as you go out into the workforce, to really understand that the web is far more than just the consumer side of things that you might be aware of. Building connections between businesses is absolutely critical way of creating efficient and effective organizations. So while our coverage has been looking at things fairly broadly, what we haven't really talked about yet is the emerging technologies and how they fit into this picture. And so that was kind of the idea of Chapter 6, at least from my understanding, is what new things are going on. And so the three big things that the author of our book decided to talk about were social media, mobile commerce, and online auctions. Now, in my opinion, online auctions, although it's very interesting, is not as huge as he likes to make it out to be. There are some interesting, and we talked a little bit about marketplaces and B2B commerce, and some of these marketplaces are very auction-oriented. And so we're going to look at it more from the consumer side, but again, just briefly get some of the terminology. But the really big and interesting things going on right now are social media and mobile commerce. If you're looking to have a career that's more cutting edge, those are the two areas I would recommend you look into. Now, that being said, I mean, there are a lot of people looking for quality people in these areas. You have to be able to perform to be able to do well in it, obviously. And so if it's something that strikes you as being really cool and interesting, you want to do some development, well, you got to learn your stuff. You can get into it. the thing is, they are rapidly changing, and you're seeing a lot of people jumping into it. So you have to be on the ball and willing to change rapidly. Okay. All right, but let's get into Web 2.0, which is the basis of social media. Okay. Now, this term, Web 2.0, was actually coined by a guy named Tim O'Reilly, who is a book publisher in the computing industry. And if you go to the bookstores, not that there's that many left anymore, but if you go to a bookstore, you'll probably see within the computing section of the bookstore a number of books that have O'Reilly listed as the publisher. Well, Tim O'Reilly coined this term, Web 2.0, and distinguished it from Web 1.0 by comparing how the web was shifting. And really, this is from the early late 90s into the early 2000s, and now to today. He saw this shift occurring. And so he tried to explain what was going on, what was different, what was new, and what was exciting. And it started with looking at the overall architecture of how people were putting things onto the web. And he said in Web 1.0, so the very early web, everything was out just publishing. So you take, if you had marketing materials, you publish it on websites. If you had a book, you published it on the whole book. It had the same basic publishing architecture that existed in other venues. Okay. This is what we've been doing for many, many years, publishing, right? What the web did, and it was a good step, was it made it much cheaper to distribute the publishing. With Web 2.0, though, there was a different architecture, which is based on the network. Okay, it's called the network architecture, and we're going to talk in great depth about what that means, because I think this is really critical to why social media is so blooming huge. Okay, so we'll get into the network architecture, but essentially it is networking between people. Now keep that in mind. We're no longer just trying to push stuff out there. Now we're trying to connect people. And if you can change the focus of your website to focus on these connections, that's where the real value can be created. And because of this, what we saw in like Web 1.0, they always talk about, let's get eyeballs. Let's get people to come to our website and see it, to view it, get those impressions, right? And Web 2.0, the terminology's changed from eyeballs to we want people using our system. We want users, people who are interacting, relating to one another. Instead of publishing, now we have participation. We're not just putting things up, we're getting people involved. And instead of trying to keep things very centralized and we control everything, we're trying to make it more decentralized, where other people can get in and participate and use our system. Okay. It's a change of focus from packaged software into services. We talked about the service-oriented architecture and cloud computing. That's all part of Web 2.0. Creating services. It's not about having this finished package that we just deliver. We want to have these pieces of functionality that we continuously update, but it continues to help people on an ongoing basis. It's not just a one-time thing and then we're done. It also moved from a way of describing what we publish, from an idea of a taxonomy, which you can think in biology. There's a taxonomy, going from kingdom, phylum, family, group, genus, species, and I might be missing one or two levels in there. But there's a taxonomy for every living thing that has to fit within that taxonomy, right? Well, that idea is being abandoned in Web 2.0 to the concept of tagging, which is basically saying, since we're working with users, every user might want to describe things differently. They have different things that they consider important. So we're going to let the users describe things by putting tags on it. Now you can think of this in terms of, if you ever used Flickr or Picasa Web or any place where you can upload pictures, very often you can tag people, tag places, sometimes even describe it with certain tags. And that's the new kind of the new concept for how we classify things. We also took a different view of what we do with our materials. So in Web 1.0, it was all about stickiness, which basically means we want people to come to our site and stay on our site. With Web 2.0, it's not about that. Now we're going to syndicate our materials to everybody else. Yes, we created something, but now we're going to give it out there, where our goal is to get our information out to as many different people as possible. And once it's out there, those other people can do what they want with it within certain parameters, but our goal is to syndicate, get it out. And Web 1.0, the whole concept around it was that business owns the data. They have control over it. And Web 2.0, the business gives that up to the users, and the user now owns the data. The user can control the data, what they want to do with that. So hopefully you can start seeing this difference between the two. Now, O'Reilly really, when he describes Web 2.0, you can see he doesn't have a very clear definition for what it is. What he sees is a general trend in multiple different areas that interrelate with one another. So let's break it down. Web 2.0. Now I really see two key concepts, two key elements for what makes something Web 2.0. Number one, the value of something is determined by the network effect. And number two, the user controls the data. Now to me, if I broke down that list that Tim O'Reilly had described, these are the two big things that I would say differentiate the Web 2.0 from Web 1.0. Okay, so let's talk about that first one, the network effect. So to understand this, we have to kind of go back and look at value in terms of broadcasting. You can think of your TV broadcast or radio broadcast, right? The value of a commercial on one of these mediums is simply in the number of people who are looking at it. And if you get more listeners or more watchers, the value of that show goes up by a proportion equal to N. Okay? And that's it's basically a linear relationship. Okay? Now, there's a first level network effect called the connect peers value. And you can think of email like this, okay? If two people have email, you have a relationship of the value of that email to those two people. Now, it's probably not going to be real high because it's only two people. But let's say 10 people now have email. How much more valuable is that? Now you can connect not just to one person, but to 10 people. And if you look at all these different interconnections, you come up with what's called an N squared value. And this is based off of what's called Metcalfe's law. That in a connected peers situation, the value of the technology is based upon an N squared relationship. So meaning the more people, the more N that you're using this technology, the more valuable it is to everybody. The telephones were kind of like this as well. The value of a telephone is not just, does one person have it or two people have it, but it's extremely valuable when all of your friends have telephones. It becomes it is huge value. In fact, how many of you would go without a telephone for the rest of your life? Maybe you'd do it for a couple days, maybe even a week, but really most people don't want to get rid of it. Well, there's another type of network effect, which is created, that is when you have self-creating and joining of groups. So it's not just a one-to-one peer connection, like when you might say email or telephone. This type of value is created when you can say, I want to include these 10 people into the discussion. So we're going to create this little group. But if it's easy to create those groups and multiple different kinds of groups, so I'll have a 10-person group, and then I'll have another 5-person group and a 3-person group, and some of the people in between the groups are shared, but not all of them. You get to choose which ones. Now is when we get to Reed's law, which states that the value is equal to 2 to the nth power. Okay, so let's break this down. What does this mean to you in terms of value? So let's just say hypothetically, you have one user is worth 2 cents. Okay, this is making this number up just to get the point across. How much would 10 users be? Well, that would be 2 to the 10th power, which is $10.24. So here's the question, and you get out your calculators and see if you can get this to work. What is the value of 1,000 users? So that would be 2 to the 1,000th power. And while you guys, if you want to pause the video and plug it in your calculator, I recommend you do, because it'll help drive home the point. And for many of you, when you do this, you're going to get an error, unless you're using a really fancy calculator, in which case you'll come back with an answer that 1,000 users, the value is equal to 1 times 10 to the 301st power. That means there's there's a 1 with 301 zeros behind it. That is really bloomin' huge. Anybody want that kind of money? Now, let's say I'm wrong with 2 cents. Let's say it's not worth, one user isn't worth 2 cents. One user is worth 1/billionth of a cent. Okay, so that's 9 zeros. So if you do the calculation again, guess what happens? You get 1 to the 292th, 1 times 10 to the 292th power. To the tooth, that doesn't sound right. But basically, 1 with 292 zeros behind it. Still really bloomin' huge. Okay, and let's say I'm wrong. The user's not worth 1/billionth of a cent. Maybe it's worth one user is worth 1 to the, I don't know. It's an incredibly small number. I mean, less than 1,000th of a, not 1,000. 100 billion or a trillion or a quadrillion or a quintillion. Even these outrageously large numbers, the value is still incredibly huge. Now, you're probably thinking, well, wait a minute, something doesn't seem right here. Okay, what's going on? Well, it is, and what you have to understand is that these are basically formulas. So, for example, in broadcast value, which would be the red line, you have n is going to be equal to some linear relationship. So there's some variable called a that represents that relationship. In the n squared value, you have a yellow is the yellow line, but you have a to the n plus a b to the n squared power, which is a geometric relationship. In the green line, you end up with an exponential relationship. So a to the nth plus b to the n squared plus c to the 2 to the nth power. Okay. Now there is a limitation on this. Otherwise, you would see, I mean, granted, Facebook, obviously, when the IPO opened, was huge, in part because people understand this concept. But there is a limitation. It's not an infinite. It's not going to, Google or Facebook did not come out at, the IPO was not 1 to the 300th or 10 times 10 to the 301th power, right? That's because groups, number one, are limited. There is a cognitive limit that most group sizes never get greater than 150. Now, it's not saying people don't have more than 150 friends, but a lot of those friends are treated more from a broadcast value or connected peers value relationship. In other words, you broadcast stuff out to people, but you really don't care to get anything back. You're not really interacting with them. Okay, so a lot of those friends are treated in that sense. The connected peers might be someone who just send a message to every now and then. But actually self-forming groups. Now on Facebook, yes, you can create your own groups, and sometimes you interact with people specifically within that group. But even so, those groups tend to be smaller. less than 150 people. And beyond that point, groups tend to revert back to a connected peers or broadcast model, or maybe multiple subgroups, or something in between. So there is a theoretical limit. This is not, it doesn't go on forever. Just because Facebook has 800 million users doesn't mean it has 800 million times 2 to the 800 millionth power. Okay, it just doesn't happen that way. However, it is still extremely powerful. And one big reason why people get on platforms such as Facebook is because all their friends are on it. Guess what? That means there's a great deal of value for you to join and to select which friends I want to connect with, to select who I'm sending messages to. These are huge, huge, powerful concepts for people to be able to do. That is why, number one, at least most people like being on Facebook is for that capability. And two, why businesses want to invest not only in Facebook, but invest in interacting on Facebook itself. Okay? Most businesses are now trying to take advantage of this platform, creating their own pages to create their own groups of people who are interested in their business. Okay? Now you can even take that a step further and say, well, I'm going to have my own business and create my own self-forming groups. Now this was originally done with things like message boards and bulletin boards, which existed back in, well before, I would say back in the early 90s, mid-90s, early 2000s. They've had these types of technologies. What Facebook did was make it so easy for anyone to get on and do, and made it so ubiquitous and so friendly to share information. It was done in such a way that everyone just wanted to get on there to share their personal information with all their friends. All right, let's move on. The new vision. So, to be successful now in business, we have to try to take this network effect into context, okay? Now, there's several major companies that are already doing this. I left off Twitter. I need to throw that on there as well. Facebook, Google+, LinkedIn, Twitter. And how is this working? So there's three big pieces of this puzzle here. You have the users, you have groups, okay? So you got to have a relationship between the users who join groups and groups who then can interact with the user, okay? So there's a relationship going on. So the people in the group is helping individual users. But what's going on in the web, though, is there's got to be a data backbone, okay? So the users are putting information, adding data. That data is being displayed to the groups. And then the users can see that group information and interact with it. Now, the big four, and again, I should have included Twitter on there, Facebook, Google+, LinkedIn, and Twitter, are not the only ones taking advantage of this network effect. And you can find a lot of other examples of this, including Flickr.com. Now, Delicious is, I think it was recently purchased, and I can't remember by whom. The idea behind Delicious is basically you're going to create your own bookmarks, okay? And you can share your bookmarks with anybody you want to. So that's kind of what their basis is, okay? So you find cool web pages, you save them, and you can share it. All right, so you can create groups of people to share. Dig is more about news stories, but again, you can select the stories that you really like, that you dig, and then share it with the group. Share it with a group of your friends or with everybody that's on the Dig platform. Plaxo turned into more of a platform for address books, sharing your address with people easily and conveniently, and connecting with your Facebook, LinkedIn, Google+ accounts. Wikipedia also shows a great deal of emphasis in this area. So you have people, not just the people who read, but people who write the articles. And the people who write all the articles on Wikipedia are just users, and they're self-forming groups by their interest in the article they want to write. And sometimes there's 5, 6, 10, 100 people working on one article. And so they basically choose what they want to do. And every single one of you can go do that too. If you want to go edit any article on Wikipedia, you can go do it. Just go out there, start editing. Okay, there's a little button you can click on to get you started. And then you can even join in. Then behind the scenes, oftentimes there's a conversation about what has been added, why it's been added. If someone disagrees with a change, you can have a discussion. There's actually a platform for that behind kind of the back door into Wikipedia that allows you to do, and I should say a back door, but one that you probably don't see as often, but is there so that people can actually interact with the group. And the latest hotness on social networks, social media, is Pinterest. For sharing images. But it can be very, very useful and is actually found to be very, very good at driving people into purchasing products. So if you have something to sell and you can do a decent job at sharing those images on Pinterest, it can actually help your business significantly. So, we also see a lot of traditional Web 1.0 companies that are now leveraging the network effects. And I would say two good examples of this is Amazon.com. And this is something that I've even used myself. When you're looking at a product, you can see what others have bought. And use those recommendations to pick something that you want. And Netflix does this too with their recommendation system. Netflix, for any of you who don't use Netflix, you get recommendations, and those recommendations are based upon what other people on the platform have watched and rated. And based upon their ratings and their similarities of their ratings with your ratings, they can give you some very decent recommendations. And I found some good movies to watch based just on those recommendations that I've never even heard of before. Okay, so what's going on here? Now, we still have users and data, but there's no real groups like in the other traditional sense. I call them, again, kind of give them the name of artificial groups. All right? So what we have through this user-generated data, so your purchasing patterns on Amazon or your recommendations on Netflix, they use that data to generate and use algorithms, so these really fancy formulas for figuring out what I call artificial groups based on these similar data patterns. And they kind of lump you with other people that have bought similar things or watched similar things and liked similar things. And by doing that, they can come up with some actually pretty good recommendations for you. So they're still leveraging this idea by creating these artificial groups to help provide you with good ideas. So that's kind of the concept around the network effect. Now let's get into the user controls of data and talk about what that means for you. All right? So in Web 2.0, you can control what you see, when you see, and in what format. You have so much more power and so much more flexibility on what you do than you ever could do before. No longer do you need to go to 20 different websites to see everything you want to see. You know, I can speak from personal experience. On Facebook, I have started liking different companies in order to get their feeds into my Facebook feed, so I don't have to go to their website to find out what's the latest going on. It's been a great time saver. Now I can control what comes to me, and I skip through a lot of stuff that I just kind of, it shows up and I don't really care about it and I quickly move on, but I have a lot more control. Alternatively, you can also create what you want and share it with everybody else. So not only can you control what you see, but you control what you create and who you share it with, and with, you know, and then that's, like, for example, pictures. You know, you take a picture, you upload it to Facebook. You can actually control who sees that picture. Okay, or send it to Flickr or Picasa Web, which is now part of Google Photos, I guess. They might be changing their name. It's the same thing, right? All right, so here's a little video that I want you to hear. about social media marketing and how it relates to all this. So let's go. All right, so she makes some really good points here. And number one, and when I say the user controls the data, there is a very important caveat to that, which is, yes, you can control putting information up on Facebook, putting information up on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on any of these photo sites, but what happens if they go out of business? What happens if they get bought out? What happens if they change their policies? What happens if they block your account for whatever reason? You need to not just control the data, but realize that, yes, you can create all these things. It's important to have that still somewhere where you can use it successfully. Okay, so by creating your own words, photos, and videos, whether it's through blogs or photo sharing sites or video sharing sites, do keep in mind that in the end, you've created it, you've shared it, but the point is you want people to eventually come back to your site, because that is where the real gold is. And so when we're thinking about how the user controls the data, realize that as a user, you might be writing a blog, you might be sharing photos and videos, and these are great tools for getting people to interact with you. Now, from a business standpoint, that is important. But eventually, what you want them to do is to come back to something. Once a business shares information, you want them to come back to you. If you have users interacting with your business, though, you want them to have that same freedom, not just to add their information, but if what are you going to do with that information once they've added it? If you don't give them a fair amount of control, they're not going to want to stick around, right? Because that is the huge thing about this content. So if you have, you create some message boards for people to come interact and talk about maybe a product you're selling, you have to find a way to make sure that they're satisfied with those message boards and the content they're adding there. Okay, make them feel ownership of it. If they feel ownership for the data they've added, they're going to be more empowered. If you are constantly undermining what they're doing, they're not going to want to keep adding information. They're going to feel like my data goes in and then it's gone, and I'll never see it again. And that is what you have to try to accomplish when you let the users control all that data. So not only can you create content, but once uploaded, users can often edit, delete, set privacy options for each of the content items. Users can comment on content, whether created by the business or by other users. And these are two big key ideas for why people even want to do it. Additionally, how the user controls the data goes beyond just the words, pictures, videos. You can think of entire search engines as based upon this. Okay, and this is, I think, and I talked briefly about this before, about Google's really most revolutionary idea in search engine rankings was making sure that businesses, yes, they do have some control over how they rank, but they're also highly dependent upon the users who link to them. That's what makes them rank higher under search engines. It's not just about what they put on their own pages. It's also about what other people say about them. In this case, you can think of users as other people using the web to connect, and Google's merely acknowledging that other people, the web is everything and Google is searching everything. Therefore, the users are the ones controlling how things rank. It's not completely dependent on the publisher anymore. Okay. So revenue models on Web 2.0. Basically everything I said in Chapter 3 still applies. You know, you can advertise on Facebook. Now those advertisements are taken a step beyond just the broadcast of how many people see it, but also because you can like advertisements. That's a very unique concept, and it's allowing people to kind of self-form groups around advertisements. And if some friends are liking an advertisement, what Facebook has found is that people are far more likely to click on the link. However, that being said, advertising on Facebook in general does far worse than advertising on other web pages. And I haven't looked at the data recently, but it's on an order of magnitude of 5 to 10 times less people click to go through an advertisement on Facebook than in other places. But if you can get people to like it, then suddenly you're going to be looking much prettier. All right? There's another way that revenue is shifting on Web 2.0, and that this data, all this user-created data, is actually creating business value. And so let's talk about some ways. Well, number one, you realize that Google offers a tremendous amount of data or services for free. Their email, their calendars. I use their reader. They have a document system, the Google Docs, where you can write Word, word processor documents, Excel, PowerPoint, and so on. Although it's not called PowerPoint, it's still got that same functionality. For a while, Google offered a 411 service, which was an informational service, but it was completely voice activated, and they offered it for free. Now, you might be wondering, this seems like a lot of technology that they're offering for free. Why are they doing it? Well, just taking their 411 service, a voice activated system, as an example. What do they do with this? Well, basically, you could call into this 411 with your voice activated questions. It would provide answers. Now, they needed voice recognition software to be able to do this. Now, voice recognition software is still in its infancy, and still, even though they've been working on it for the last 15 years, I'd say it's still in its infancy because it's really not very good yet. What will make it better? If Google has more samples to work from. The more samples it has, the better they can create algorithms that deconstruct the voice signal and understand what's really being said. So Google offered all this stuff for free, basically to get a larger sampling of voice signals. And then they took that technology, advanced it, and they moved it into their Android phone systems. No, it's quite a brilliant little move on their part, because now they have all this voice-activated technology that they can easily transfer from this one service that they got all this for free. They perfected the technology with this data, and now they can create a new technology based on that. And guess what they're doing? They're offering Android for free. They might have some licensing agreements with phone services. I don't know exactly how the details are working there, but Google is also making money then on the Android phone service. They can put ads on their search and still make money that way. So Google is looking at this long term. How can they build the capabilities of finding information and how we interact with these devices to get the information, but they're still trying to make money off of it in the long term by providing that advertising to get us what we want, when we want, where we want. You also saw this with Amazon and Netflix, how they're leveraging the shopping and renting patterns. They look at a whole ton of information and then can provide recommendations for you. So this free data, every time you interact on Amazon or on Netflix, they capture that information. And based on that captured information, they can provide decent recommendations for their customers, helping the customer get what they want faster or closer to what their needs are. And then there's even a third example, and I don't know if any of you have heard of Zillow.com. And if you haven't, I recommend you go out to their website, even right now. Just, pause the video, go check it out. But Zillow.com leverages data about real estate. Okay, it has this huge database that looks at how information, what has sold in your area, what is currently for sale, the entire history of properties for your city. Now, it's even possible, you as a user, to go into Zillow and change information about your house. So suppose you put an addition onto the house. You can change that. Right? Maybe you've updated your kitchen quite significantly and you think the home value needs to be reflected in that. You can go in and edit the data to help improve that. But what does Zillow do? It leverages all this information. And a lot of this is available in the public domain, so it's free. They just cobble it together, use this data that people have entered themselves, and they're creating a great deal of business value to people who are looking for homes to buy. I can tell you, recently I bought a home, and I use Zillow on a daily basis. I was looking at homes for sale, comparable homes in the neighborhood that have sold recently. So I had a decent idea of the value of all the homes that I was looking at before I even went to look at them. And to say, are you overpriced, underpriced? I even got to see pictures of the home, so I knew what I was getting into before I even started. It was brilliant. I loved it. All right. So what's the technology behind it all? I mean, obviously these are all on the internet, right? But there's more that's going on here. The big thing, web services. So we talked about services in B2B. They're also being used for a lot of B2C commerce. Okay, business to consumer commerce. Web services, and the two main types of web services. One is called SOAP, ideal for much larger, more complex programs, and a newer one called REST, ideal for smaller, less complex programs. Okay. In fact, I even taught a class once that had people develop web services using the REST model, the REST architecture. A great way of really taking this information and making it available. It's a service. Remember when I said when Tim O'Reilly was listing the differences between Web 1.0 and Web 2.0, services is one of the big things. Okay, we now have the technology to do services easily. The second is syndication, which means we can take content and provide it out for people to use very, very easily. Okay, and RSS is one of the biggest ones out there, kind of the cornerstone for success of the blogging world today, or even a lot of news sites. So the news. If you want to watch a news article, most news on most websites are provided through RSS. Really simple syndication. Facebook is getting information through RSS. Okay, you can actually publish to Facebook using RSS. So most news sites are using RSS to syndicate their stories, and even most large businesses today, even many mid-sized and small businesses have at least one external blog, and they may even have an internal blog as well. Some of them have multiple blogs. Like if you go to Google, you'll probably find 6, 7, 8, 9 different blogs, often for different product lines. Have a different blog for a different product. In each one, and then they also have their official blog, which is for the entire company. Okay, a lot of businesses are doing this now. This is very, very typical. Other technology. Well, really, to get web services to work, you need two other technologies: XML and JSON. Extensible Markup Language and JavaScript object notation. And this allows you to take data and transfer it over the net very, very easily. So it integrates data from multiple sources, and what allows you to take all this different data, send it across the web very easily, and then at the other end they can deconstruct the data and display it in a way that's very useful. There's also much richer interfaces that allows you to interact creatively. Now, traditional ones like Flash has been around for a number of years. There's other competing technologies like Silverlight, which is developed by Microsoft. Although now I think Microsoft's pretty much going to abandon Silverlight. So it was something they played with, basically as a competitor to Flash. It really did not take off. The big one, I would say, is Ajax. Because Ajax is built right on top of HTML and JavaScript and can take in XML or JSON data and display it on a web page. You don't need this extra add-on from Flash. It allows you to create very dynamic websites, okay? And to transfer between the web server and your browser without reloading the page. And so the most brilliant example of this is Google Maps. So here's the page for Google Maps, right? Now you'll see up here we have a toolbar for searching, get directions, my places. But if I come over here on the map and click, let's say I double click on North Carolina, bam, what happened? Look at the rest of the page when I double click again. Nothing else reloads, just the image. Just part of the page, not the entire page, just a small part. That is Ajax working in the background. You are basically, what Google's doing there is reloading the image within the page without refreshing the entire page. It is bloody brilliant technology. The guys who came up with this are wicked smart, and that they discovered this and figured out a way to make it work. So Ajax stands for Asynchronous JavaScript Extension. No, I'm sorry, Asynchronous JavaScript XML and XML. But it allows you to get this instant feedback for users. So you only send bits and pieces of data. You don't have to send an entire web page, which might take a second. You can send a small portion of data to refresh the page. So it takes much less time, much, much quicker. You can just interact with pages and see what's going on. Now you can also think of this in terms of, you go to Facebook, sometimes when you're scrolling down, you'll see that there's more information popping up as you scroll, right? The data on the web page is dynamically being added as you scroll down. The whole page is not being refreshed, but they're adding parts of the page as you go, only the parts that you need. And so it makes it far richer for you to interact with it, but quick enough that you're not sitting there waiting for all this data to show up, right? Really, really great stuff. And then you can take, once you have all these technologies, and start combining them together combining two or more web services can create some really, really cool stuff. Now, here's a very simple example. I took a screenshot of it. Even though I know you can't read it very well, but I'll explain it to you. This is basically combining information about, it basically takes a map and then displays a data set from different cities and restaurants in those cities. Okay, so you can have, let's say you are, Best Buy, and so you have cities throughout the U.S. and you want your users to be able to know where your nearest Best Buy is. You can show them a map, Google Maps, but integrate that with your data set of all the addresses of all your locations. You take those addresses, you integrate them with Google Maps, and you can pin points on the map for every single location. And then you show it to your users, and the users can then click and say, I click on this particular dot, this pin, it takes me right to the place, and then I say, oh, I want directions. Guess what? They're already within the Google framework. It's easy to get directions to your nearest location. This type of stuff, though, I mean, you just think about there's thousands and thousands of web services out there. Being able to come up with creative ways of combining them means there's almost an infinite number of different types of mashups you could create. When I did a class with using Ajax and mashups a couple of years ago. One I thought was quite brilliant. And they actually accomplished it by the end of the semester. They used a mashup between Amazon, eBay, and Google Translate. Because this was a foreign student, it was in the group, and he was from Germany, but when he went to Amazon, he had to go to the American Amazon site. Now, there's a German version of the Amazon site, which is all in German. But when he went to the American Amazon site, everything was in English. And while he could speak English, he would prefer to be able to search Amazon using German words. But since he was living here in America, he couldn't do that. So what he did with his mashup was he created a system that he could type in a word in German, translate it into English, send that word to the Amazon's web service to do a search. That would return a list of items, all in English. He would then retranslate all the items back into German and display that on the screen. Now that, I thought, was an incredibly brilliant idea. Yeah, I could see an entire website that just translating for international students. And you could easily, once you've learned the technology, you could put something together like this, market it to international students, and you could basically make a commission on every single sale from that website. How awesome would that be? In fact, if someone hasn't done that, I'm tempted to say, yeah, I'll help fund you if you want to do that. I mean, I think that's really, really brilliant and really, really cool to put something together like that. But that's what you can do with it. All right. So that pretty much sums up what I'm going to talk about Web 2.0. I did get, that's some of the social media is built into that. And social media is really taking advantage of a lot of that. So the big four social media companies out there, are platforms: Facebook, LinkedIn, Google+, and Twitter. And Pinterest is an up-and-comer. Keep your eye on that. And there's a lot of other ones out there too. But I want to move on to mobile commerce, and I'm only going to talk about this very briefly, although I could, like I said, spend a week or more talking about all the stuff going on in mobile commerce. Because there's multiple different ways that you can now make money on the web, on the mobile devices. And a lot of the devices, as they're integrating, and this is kind of a trickier area to talk about because it's not all internet-based, but a lot of it is. Or at least have part of the internet backbone built into it as far as how they connect, even if they're not technically web pages displaying. So there's really actually three main ways that people are making money through mobile commerce. And number one is just creating apps for whatever reason out there, and then charging for those apps. So it might be $1 to $10. There are rarely you'll see apps that are worth that cost a bit more, $20 to $100. But the big ones, they cost only a couple dollars, and so most people are like, yeah, sure, it's only a couple bucks. What's the big deal? I'll download it and see if it works. And people are making money building apps, just doing that, and some people fairly decently. There's also the way of mobile commerce is extending how people collect money. So, for example, in this picture you see an iPad. In the upper left-hand corner, you see this white square up there. And I actually have one of those little white squares. And it can plug in not just into your iPad, but into Android devices. So that's what I got for my phone. But what this allows you to do is that basically that white square is a credit card reader. And all you do is you plug it into your earplug hole. And then there's an app that sits on your device, and you can put all of your products that you're selling on that app. Okay? When people come and want to buy something, you can now take this, let's say an iPad, you have a listing, you count up, you select the items that someone wants to buy, you give them the total with sales tax. They swipe their card on your little card reader. They sign it, the iPad, and it's electronically sent back. Isn't that bloody brilliant? So as a company, especially a mobile company that might be selling in multiple different places, a device like this is incredibly useful. And what's great about this, the device, that little square, and the app is free. What they're doing is charging you for each individual transaction. I think there's like a 2 or 3% charge. So you would increase your prices by 2 or 3% to cover the costs of the credit card reader or the credit card transaction. But otherwise, it's wonderful. Okay, and then there's the third way of mobile commerce, which is building the system so consumers buy your products. And right now you're seeing three major companies into this market. You have your Apples, your Apple products, you have your Google products, and you have your Amazon. Okay, all three of them are doing this now. So with the iPad, if you want to buy music, where do you usually go? iTunes. Okay, if you own a Google product, where do you go? Well, now there's Google Play. And on Google Play, they have a music section where you can download music or buy music. And then there's, Amazon, same thing. You're on the Kindle Fire, and you want to buy music. It takes you right to the Amazon MP3 store. Okay, they're building the actual system so that they can make money coming and going. They sell the device. They could sell the apps that you can put on the device, and they sell the products that you can buy to put on the device itself. Talk about an entire system of basically separating you from your money. And you buy the device to do it. Now, how freaking awesome is that for these companies? And that's why they do it. And that's why when I heard Amazon was selling the Kindle Fire for a loss, every single purchase, it cost Amazon more to create the product than what it was selling it for. Why in the world would they do that? Well, because they knew they would be making money on the back end, selling MP3s, selling books, selling movies. And that is what they were banking on. Okay, so mobile commerce today is really looking at these three major areas of where your company can do it. Now, is there any other companies that can enter into the third one? I would say Microsoft probably will in the near future. They're developing a new tablet system, and I think they're going to try to do the same thing. Any other major players in the market? I don't know who else could really effectively compete like those three are. Taking other people's money on your mobile system. Now, device-wise, there are a couple other competitors to Square. And I believe Intuit is one of those. And I could easily see someone creating, any credit card company could come up with this, a little device that you can put on your mobile device and swipe cards. That's not incredibly difficult. What might be more difficult, though, well, what's useful, though, for businesses, let's refocus this question. What's more useful for businesses is that they have this flexibility now. And so they can just simply walk around with these devices anywhere and take people. And what's really great about the Square, and this is what I love talking about this, is you guys can all get that on your own phones, okay? And so let's say your friend borrows $20 and he needs to pay you back. And he's like, well, I don't have any cash. You can just tell him, that's all right, I'll take credit. And you can. You could take a credit card transaction from your friends that, they owe you money. Well, great. Pay me right now with a credit card. And it is that easy. All right. Lastly, let's talk about auctions. So there's a lot of different types of auctions. And I don't want to go into all the details of it. But, you got the traditional English auction where you start at a low price, bidding increases until no bidder is willing to bid higher. And then you have what's called a Dutch auction, which starts at a high price, bidding automatically decreases until the bidder accepts that price. Okay, so it's the first person to say, no, I'll buy it at that price. And then the auction's done. You have variations of the auction, of the English auction. So first price sealed bid. So you have secret bidding process. The highest bidder pays the amount of the highest bid. There's something called a Vicroy auction. Second price sealed bid auction. So you have secret bidding process. The highest bidder pays the amount of the second highest bid. So in other words, if you're willing to go higher, but no one else is willing, you pay what that second highest bid is. Now this is what eBay actually does. They use the Vicroy auction. Because you don't know who else is bidding. It's secret. You do know the price of what the current bid is, but you don't know who is doing it. And you don't actually pay what your highest bid is. You pay what the next highest bid is. And then there's the double auction, open outcry, and this is what you might see on the stock exchange. Okay, people yelling, I want to buy, sell, sell, sell. You've probably seen them in some movies. Those are double auctions, and then there's double auction sealed bid, and even a reverse auction, where instead of trying to buy something, you're trying to sell something, where multiple sellers submit price bids to an auctioneer for a single buyer. Right. So what are the big things going on in auctions? Well, I would say a major issue is what services come along with those auctions. Okay, so we know that you can put pretty much any product up for an auction, and they have seen pretty much everything come up on eBay, everything under the sun. So what do we need to make it work better? Well, big things is when you're working with a lot of people, getting a lot of buyers, a lot of sellers getting together, most of these people don't know each other. So trust is always a huge, huge, huge issue. Can I trust the seller? Can the seller trust the buyer? Well, this is where the escrow services first originated. The idea is we're going to put money into an escrow that's going to be there to make sure that the buyer receives what they're supposed to receive and the seller gets paid what they're supposed to get paid. And so escrow services quickly developed around a lot of auctions, particularly eBay, as a means of making sure that the product received is what it should be. What other types of things out there? There's auction directories. So you know what auctions are available, what similar products are. I mean, eBay basically is an auction directory. And when I say eBay, there are other auction services out there. It's just eBay is the hugest, most popular one out there. There's even software to help you with the bidding or selling process. So there are particular apps that will allow you to bid for you in case you can't be at the computer at the time an auction is going on or is going to be ending in 10 minutes, but you have to run to a meeting. You can enter your bids into software to help you with the bidding process. And then there's even consignment services built into it. So it'll allow you to buy something now, or basically, I want this product. Will you reserve the product for me? Here's part of my money now. I'll give you the rest later. And then once I've paid everything, they'll ship the product. So between all this, though, you can see that the auctions are really trying to develop. It's kind of as someone called it, the world's largest yard sale or garage sale. Especially eBay has got everything that you might want to get rid of. You can put it up there. Okay, this creates a lot of conflicts when you can't necessarily trust what you're buying because you can't see it directly immediately. You don't know if what they say it is what the seller says it really is, if the pictures are accurate. And so a lot of software has been developed around this to help with this process. Well, that's all I've got for today. So to summarize what we talked about, Web 2.0, so when we talk about social media, it really should be wrapped around the concept of what is Web 2.0. And the two major phenomena, the two key elements, are that the network effect creates value. And not just a peer-to-peer connection, but the network effect from Reed's Law that self-forming groups, self-created groups, create a tremendous amount of value equal to an exponential 2 to the nth power relationship. The second major concept is that now the users control the data. They can create, share, and consume whatever information that they want in the manner that they want. And as a business person, that is what you need to try to tap into. One, how do I get many, many users? And a big part of getting those users to me is allowing the users to have control. By doing that, I can, as a business owner, tap into this phenomenal value that's created from and revolves around social media and this Web 2.0 concept. Secondly, we talked briefly about mobile commerce. And it does heavily utilize web technologies to enable the open mobile platform for commerce. And this allows businesses to make money in multiple different ways, from creating their own apps to taking money through their mobile device, collecting money, or creating an entire system of money making through mobile technology. And then auctions offer a way for a non-fixed bid way of commerce. It's very popular, and likely it's something that's not going to go away. Even if eBay struggles, another auction service was bound to spring up that will take its place. And then you even see auctions in B2B commerce. It's not just consumer oriented. And so this is the kind of the advanced technologies that are really going on here. I wouldn't really call auctions that advanced at this point. It's pretty well established, but especially Web 2.0 and the social media phenomena and mobile commerce are now just kind of the big hot areas in web technologies. That's all we got for today. I look forward to